You know, international fraud is very, very sophisticated. If you look at what happens with SGR and what is going to happen with Jomo Kenyatta, one of the areas that they steal a lot of money is insurance. Because what they do is that the insurance premiums for some of these facilities are in the millions of shillings. And for many, many years, you can imagine how much premiums are paid. So, and you've heard about the Amaco, the insurance company owned by President William Ruto, and the way the company now has grown very far, and including the CEO has been put within the board of NHIF. Now, those are the kind of back-to-back deals that will be done by Amaco and some reinsurance company in India or insurance brokerage and so forth. So where maybe Kenyans must begin is why would this kind of deal or this kind of situation arise in Kenya in terms of a public undertaking? And I think the whole idea of either public-private partnerships and including corruption scandals have got a history. It's not lost to me that if you look back in the mirror of history, a lot of these deals come up with, kind of look innovative. They look like they are beginning with something that is useful to the country. And when you do the calculation later or look at the fine print, you find that actually there were budgeted corruption. Back in the early 90s, there was a scandal called Goldenberg International that was chiefly done by a Indian businessman called Kamlesh Patni. The Goldenberg scandal was really the government of Kenya paying a compensation through the Central Bank of Kenya of 35% for the export of gold. Now, of course, there was no gold in Kenya, and most people would agree. Certainly, in the 90s, the purported export of gold was itself just a scandal. And later, when investigators were to look at Goldenberg, they found that the whole idea was because there was exchange controls, Kamlesh Patni would mop up illegal dollars from the black market in Kenya, having sent boxes of air abroad. He would then pay the invoices by banking dollars in cash, and he would bank them in a bank called Exchange Bank, which he began for purposes of the scandal. And once the receipts of the exports were received, the government would pay a 35% compensation on all the bankings that he had put in. But the funny thing was that it cost him about 20% above the ruling exchange rate to buy black market dollars. So he was netting a profit of 15% on just buying dollars here in Kenya and re-exporting them. And that was the Goldenberg scandal. Later, and that was during the regime of President Daniel Arap Moi. Then later on, under the regime of President Mwai Kibaki, the infamous Goldenberg scandal was, overtaken by something called agro-leasing. And the agro-leasing scandal, again, in the forefront was another businessman called Deepak Kamani, who was joined by Kenyan actors. And agro-leasing itself was another monumental scandal. And it started with the central bank again. The central bank, through the beckoning of the treasury, gave a blanket guarantee that the Kenya government would pay any of the lenders who lent to the Goldenberg, to the agro-leasing entities, any money owed to them. So ghost companies were registered across the world, and they lent money to organizations that were purported to deliver goods to Kenya under guarantee of the central bank. One of them was an immigration or passports venture. The other one was a forensic lab, and the list went on, and it was in the billions of shillings. When later, you went behind the scandal, none of these things were done. The guarantees of the central bank had been issued to the companies that purportedly delivered these services. And later they sued the Kenya government abroad to receive billions of shillings for something that was not done. This was so embarrassing to the Kibaki regime. It led to the resignation of then anti-corruption czar John Githongo. But as Githongo then got out of office, he released a dossier that led to the removal of 6 cabinet ministers and the falling of so many, Christopher Murungaro, and in fact the private secretary to the president, Alfred Gitonga, Magari PS, and Mwiraria, the minister for finance, and so forth. So the scandal of Adani needs to be looked at in terms of the history of why in each regime there seems to come up with this fantastic venture idea that is basically looted to maximum looting of the Kenyan coffers. Why would a Kenyan business entity cooperate with an external entity, sign a PPE agreement for 30 years, where the guarantor is the Kenyan government through the Kenya Airports Authority, and what is the fine print behind it? And I'm sure as we go on forward, I wanted to speak a bit about it, but that gives you a kind of a synopsis, Anthony, of how corruption has become an enterprise and why the Adani deal is no different from other regimes where huge scandals have been created as a way of creating a looting spree in the country. The pattern of corruption over the last 30 to 40 years has been that it is easier to externalize funds. So when the transaction is done, to keep it away from the eyes of Parliament, from the eyes of the auditor and general, from the eyes of the Kenyan taxpayer, it is become a practice that if you do a deal that is externalized, then you are looking at the Kenyan side without looking at where the money went. And that pattern has continued. In fact, if you look at the scandals, as I said, in the last 30 to 40 years, the one that really caught people in trouble was Chicken Gate, which involved high-level corruption at the IBC, or the Electoral Commission then. And this involved an English firm and the commission to do chini business. But the British government was having none of it. And the irony about Chicken Gate was that the British government was able to meet its challenge in prosecution, arrest the directors of the company. They were charged in court and convicted. In fact, they served in prison sentences. The money that was looted from Kenya was taken and returned, while in Kenya, the people who did it on the Kenyan side got scot-free. But that was because there was no appetite for corruption in Europe and particularly in England. So you're asking me why this idea of looking for India is becoming like a norm. And maybe it is because it is easier to do those deals with Dubai and India, where there are no high standards for tracing and ensuring that money which has been looted from a third world country can be recovered by its people. Such laws would be very difficult to follow in India. And I think if you look at the people behind this scam that is now developing at JKIA, there's this group of Jayesh Sayani that has been in corruption discussions before in Kenya. This is a fellow of Nairobi West Hospital. And there was a time in the Ministry of Health, he had even been banned as a supplier because of several incidents of pharmaceutical supplies. This also happened with his involvement with Breeze and clinics and other medical provision services with the NHIF. and now he's the middleman between the Adani Group and the KIA. And the idea of probably using India is because of governance, relaxation of governance issues in India as opposed to Europe. When you talk about a 30-year deal to take JKIA and to be able to run it through their control, the question is, because JKIA is a dollar-operated facility, that is why they want it. If you remember in the old days, there was the deal that was the duty-free, the Kenya duty-free deal, again fronted by Kamlesh Patni and some groups from Dubai. And why JKIA is a hotcake is because all the airlines and all the cargo planes using the airport pay for landing fees, fuel, all the things that they use in all the airports through US dollars. All tickets and all payments for flights are all done through dollars, and therefore the fees which are paid towards the management of the airport, including any of the facilities like the shops up there and all that, are all dollar related. So basically what you're basically doing is this money doesn't come into the exchequer or into the Kenyan economy. It goes into the Adani banking system. So it's a revenue in the Adani group. And the Adani group takes those revenues and trades with them as a supplier, as whatever it will be, in all the components of the airport. And then they pay what fees they are paying to KRA or through the Kenyan taxpayer as a fee through a Kenya shilling payment. So first of all, if you look at the loss in terms of foreign exchange earnings, and you're talking in billions of shillings throughout the year, when you look at the loss in terms of the access to the profit of those enterprises paying taxes in Kenya, because they are going to be run. The airport shops, for example, in the duty-free zone, are actually almost as though they are not in Kenya. They're in no man's land. And therefore, those profits are no longer going to be under the dragnet of the Kenyan taxman. And that is where all this play is coming in. How much of this going on? How much of this money is mafioso? How much of this money will not be available for the auditor or will not be available for the taxman, but will be now with Adani, his sponsors and his political godfathers? And I think that is the danger of this transaction. The danger of this transaction is that it's going to be a ghost like Goldenberg. You will not be able to actually quantify the figures because they will not be available locally because they are external figures, and the whole deal is structured to be external and not local. The good thing about the noise that is coming out from Kenya, it's already made a major impact in India. Many of the Indian newspapers are already carrying some of these stories about whether this thing going sour will create animosity between the Kenyan people and India. And there is already some outcry on it because of the way in which the Kenyan people are raising questions. But, if we do not raise these questions, if you look at Kenya Airways, even as an institution, when they were buying the Dreamliners and several aircraft, there was a lot of money that was lost. And for many years, the losses that have come from the airline have been of the same nature, where deals were done abroad in dollars, where a company, Simba or Jambo, I think it was called, that was actually buying the plane and then selling them to Kenya. There was a middleman who was then being paid in dollars, and those dollars were a substantial amount of money. International fraud is very, very sophisticated. If you look at what happens with SGR and what is going to happen with Jomo Kenyatta, one of the areas that they steal a lot of money is insurance. Because what they do is that the insurance premiums for some of these facilities are in the millions of shillings. And for many, many years, you can imagine how much premiums are paid. So what they do is that they come up with a rate of premium which is paid somewhere abroad. Everybody knows that insurance companies have brokers, and every amount of insurance you pay to any company, a brokerage fee or an agency fee is paid for the insurance. Then they go ahead and reinsure the risk with Lloyd's of London or any other of the reinsurers like Munich Re. And once that is reinsured, that itself generates another commission. And so people are just looking at the issue of running the airport, but there are services and other things that amount to billions of shillings that are beyond the naked eye, that are levied against the taxpayer. And those are the commissions that those guys in government are pushing through. And you've heard about the Amaco, the insurance company owned by President William Ruto. And the way the company now has grown very far, and including the CEO has been put within the board of NHIF. Now, those are the kind of back-to-back deals that will be done by Amaco and some reinsurance company in India or insurance brokerage and so forth. So it's not just the immediate figure or the immediate issue in front of you that leads to massive corruption. It is the fine print and those things that are hidden behind that also bring, like now, for example, the airport parking. Airport parking is one of those things that bring a lot of revenue to airports because they charge by hour and so forth. And you can imagine such a revenue is very hard to be able to police if you are not in control. The airport is being controlled by a company in India. Then that revenue will just be their revenue. About cargo and the movement of cargo, how Kenya in the early 90s was moving around 150 tons of horticultural produce a day to Europe. That grew to almost 200 to 300 tons. The question then is, if it's how much of that is going through the airport, and how much of that, how much of it can go through without visibility to the naked eye. What I'm trying to explain to you, this is like opening up a port of entry, like Kenya Ports Authority, and giving it to a private person, and you cannot know what comes in Kenya and what doesn't come in. This is a critical thing that is going to lead to millions and millions of dollars of theft to the country, and therefore it cannot be allowed to continue.